survivors of sexual violence, how they could reclaim or start to reclaim their sense of self and create some purpose.
It almost brings me to tears just thinking about it right now. There was one moment where I was just walking up the stairs to get to the area right at the back, the accessible area for people in wheelchairs, to go see a friend of mine. And a woman sort of grabbed my hand as I walked past, and she said, "I'm 80 years old and I'll never forget what happened to me."
That's when I really learned about how much this stuff is swept under the rug.
That's part of what I was saying about believing and listening, helping that person to not feel alone.
I think a lot of people get into leadership roles, but they haven't necessarily done the work. And I think, to your point, I think it ultimately catches up.
Eventually the dam will burst because...
Jenny, good morning and welcome to the UltraGrowth podcast. How are you going?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, but look, I'm doing great. I just had my daughter at the door trying to get in here to the studio, so I had to usher her out.
Oh.
But I think, yeah, when she hears me at home, sometimes she'll try to run in the back and hang out with Dad, but she can be quite distracting. So, yeah.
That's absolutely fine. I'm very lucky we have a separate studio in our backyard where it's completely not attached to the house. So it makes it easier for everyone to stay separate to me.
Ours is too, but the issue is she can see me through the kitchen and then hear me, and then I'll hear little feet running pitter patter in the backyard, and next thing you know, she's knocking on the door. But yeah, look,
Beautiful.
Yeah, she is. But look, I really am thankful that you've joined me on the show. It's a big topic, a big conversation, and I heard your talk at the TEDx in Sydney, and I was really, really moved. I think all of us were moved, and I just knew that I had to get you on the show. So for our audience, can you share your journey and what inspired you to become a leadership coach and advocate for survivors of sexual abuse?
Well, for a start, I experienced sexual violence in my childhood. So this is going back quite a long time ago now. And I did everything I could to put that away, to ignore the reality of what happened to me and really push the pain down under the surface. So in the decades since then, I really worked hard at being the best that I could in my chosen career. And in my early days, I was a classical musician, believe it or not. I used to perform with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra as a casual. And then I got into corporate world and I got into leadership development as a large part of my career. And then I got into looking after organisational strategy. It's a large part of my career as well. But leadership development was a big part of it. And then to get to the point of how did I get into this aspect of coaching and then advocacy for those who've experienced sexual violence. There was a bit of a tipping point for me in 2016 when I got breast cancer. And it was then that I really stopped to think, am I making that positive difference in the world in those areas that are really important to me, that I want to do? And as much as I loved the job that I had, looking after organisational strategy, it was enough for me to then stop and think, actually, no, I'm not using my time, this one precious life, to the degree that I really want to in terms of helping other people. And so I left the role that I was doing. It took a bit of time because we were deep in a very massive project. So it took about a year to be able to leave the job that I was doing. And then that started the process of really working on this advocacy for supporting people who've experienced sexual violence. At the same time, I also set up my business for my own corporate work that I was doing, and that's something that we can get into separately if you wish. So I was doing both of these things at the same time, and that was really how I got into that process.
At the time when you started to develop yourself as a leadership coach, had you done the personal and inner work concurrently? Like, were you healed, so to speak? And did you leverage that then to get into leadership coaching, or were you still kind of ignoring and denying all that stuff? Like, how did your evolution into leadership coaching and working with other people align with the timing of you working on yourself?
I would say that my personal development work has been there for as long as I can remember, I would say. And I know that sounds really strange. If I go back to my very early adulthood, and I would even say earlier than that, but if I go back to my very early adulthood, I was that sort of person who was always had my head into some sort of personal growth book or doing something to develop my own self-awareness. The other thing that really helped me back in those early days, I got a music scholarship to do year 11 and 12, so my final 2 years of high school. And I had to leave home in order to take up this scholarship. So I ended up living on my own for those 2 years and then beyond that. But for my last 2 years of high school, I was living on my own. It was during those 2 years that I was introduced to meditation. And so that was something that has actually formed a foundational part of my own growth over the years. Over all of those years, there is so much that I've done within that field and then within personal development. And yes, I know this was at the same time as sort of trying to ignore the reality of what happened to me. But there's this interesting sort of junction there of trying to ignore that all of that happened and yet at the same time build up my own self-awareness and my resilience, which is what I needed for those years when I lived on my own and finishing high school. And because that was an extremely challenging time for me, and that was post all of the sexual violence that I'd experienced as well. So I was dealing with a huge amount. It's a long ongoing journey. But in terms of being able to get to that point of supporting other people with their recovery from sexual violence, I had to face full on. I could no longer push it down under the surface. I had to come face to face with what I had experienced. And then that meant that I had to live with the rage, I guess is the only way of describing it, with the rage of what I had experienced until I could move through that inferno and get to the other side. And all of this happened after I had my kids, and I had my kids, relatively late, in my late 30s. And it was particularly after I had my daughter, who's the second of my 2 children, I just I can't ignore this anymore. And so once I had worked through that process, come face to face with it, stepped into and then was able to eventually step out of the inferno, or at least the inferno had cooled by that stage. I had done enough work. Then I felt like, okay, now I'm ready to do something about this. I thought, actually, Jane, now I'm ready to do something about it and about supporting other people. And I commenced that process. And then I realized that actually my story isn't complete yet. I thought my story was complete, but it wasn't. I knew I needed to go to the police and report the crimes.
If we rewind the tape, like that, I think this is remarkable. So it sounds like your solution to your trauma was that initially you went into a world of personal development, but you didn't actually get support from like an external body or advocates yourself, right? Like, so there wasn't any kind of group. So you were kind of dealing with it on your own through your own personal development journey, but you still weren't actually receiving support in a group form. Is that correct?
I wasn't receiving specific support in a group form, but my desire for personal growth included doing personal development courses, so to speak. So there were times where I was in group settings where people would talk about their challenges from the past. So that was a form of support for me. But those groups were never specifically about sexual violence. So that was something that I was definitely doing on my own until that point in time where I knew that I needed to come face to face with this. And then I sought specific help about it, which was really a long time afterwards. But that was the way that happened for me.
Yeah, I think that's why, I mean, it's quite remarkable. I mean, we know in the addiction community that so much of the benefits for people that are actually coming out of addiction or is the community specific stuff, right? So other addicts and other alcoholics helping people recover. Whereas with you, it almost sounds like you were able to kind of get into a therapeutic community and make the connections and hear other people's experiences and their strength, and I suppose in their hope in regards to their life, although it wasn't specific to sexual abuse, and you were able to leverage that to, I suppose, support yourself in your own development.
Yeah, that's a really insightful way of looking at it.
So, how is breaking the silence around your own experiences, how's it shaped your approach to coaching and supporting others?
I am very aware that every person's experience with this and journey with this is different. It's specific to them, and they've got their own way of wanting to deal with it, or it's so complex. There's so much to it. So I am very much, each time I'm speaking with someone, and I've got to say as well, RJ, when I spoke to the police, I put everything that I was doing on hold because I didn't want to do anything that was going to interfere with the police investigation and process. And that's actually only just wrapped up, only about 6 weeks ago. Like the final step of that, the sentencing was, where are we at the end of it? So 6 weeks ago. So I'm only now at the point of being able to pick this up again because I didn't want to do anything that was going to interfere. So I want to put that in there, that I wouldn't put myself forward as someone who's done lots and lots and lots in this space in terms of supporting other people. I mean, I have on very much an informal basis, and when I was doing all of my Wisdom of Survivors, that's what I have my project as being Wisdom of Survivors. I did with that before I started my police investigation, and I've picked it up again. But still, the work that I do and the work that, and just who I am as an individual, and the fact that I have actually spoken to so many people about this helps me to realize that each person's experience is different. So what I do is very much be with the person who they are right now. I put on my beginner's mind. I put on my curiosity, and most of all, my compassion and my willingness just to be present and to listen and to help them feel not alone and to bring in that care. And that's very much about what I do, how I do it with people.
The reframe on that question specific to, let's say, leadership coaching is, how is your experience with the trauma informed the way that you coach and the way that you might experience people when you're coaching? Because I mean, one of the things that has always been quite evident to me is that, in a lot of like organizational culture projects, you'll have these seminars where you'll get these teams together and you'll try to like create a environment for a high performing team. However, if someone is suffering from trauma, they can't bring their best self, right? I think a lot of these programs tend to ignore that people kind of have to be doing the personal work too, because you can get everyone in a room for a day and rah rah, but then tomorrow that person is stuck in their stuff. And I suppose, just making an assumption here, going through what you've been through, I think that you would have a different perspective and possibly a unique way of connecting with individuals because of what you've been through. And I suppose that is what I'm also wondering.
Yes, there is that understanding that it may not show it on the surface, just like it didn't appear that way for me as well. But so many people have experienced trauma of whatever variety that might look like. And far many people than we would actually realize have experienced the specific trauma of sexual violence as well. And so there's that understanding. And a lot of what I do is more one-to-many rather one-to-one in my leadership work. In my leadership work, a lot of my forte is very much in the one-to-many rather than sure, I do that, and I am a certified leadership coach as well, so I do the one-to-one. But I very much have to bring to the group work that I do that understanding that within that group of people who I'm with, there will be people who've experienced trauma, and there are very likely to be people who've experienced sexual violence. And so when I'm with those groups, it's very important to me to be as tuned in as I can possibly be to what it is that people are actually bringing on that day, and an understanding that they may not be showing some of the things that are hiding under the surface. I make a great effort to make sure that I'm actually having the one-on-one conversations as well. I'm really tuning into what are those signals that I'm getting, what are those, without actually thinking that everything that I'm thinking is actually the truth, because we know that that's not the case. We might be misinterpreting signals as well. But that calls upon me to even more be checking in with people, to be making modifications to what it is that I'm offering, if what I think I'm offering might not be something that suits every person in the room. So these modifications are important as well. So it's also that understanding of just that care and compassion, and how sometimes it's difficult for people to offer that to themselves. And being able to do that as a support for them is something that's important that I bring into this process as well.
Do you think that leaders can compartmentalize their stuff in the form of trauma or things that are maybe affecting them adversely in their psychology or personal life? Do you think that leaders can compartmentalize that when leading, or at some point you have to look at your stuff? Like, and it's not a loaded question. Like, I actually don't know. What's your view on that?
I think that people can, for a period of time, whatever that might be, put that aside, or be able to ignore that, or stick that in a little bit of a room within their mind and shut off that room. But I don't think that that's something that can be effective on a long-term strategy, because, and I know I'm not actually a psychologist either, so I'm probably not actually fully trained to give a definitive answer to this. But from my experience of having been working with people for quite a long time in all sorts of different ways, eventually it catches up with them. And if we're not looking at this in a way with self-compassion and with self-care, and perhaps with a great deal of support around us as well, then it could very well backfire on us in a way that is a disaster. And I don't know if that's something that you would say from your own experience as well.
I think that whenever you have a domain where fear can be prevalent, and when we're at work and we're talking about our finances, our ambitions, and there's a lot of things tied up for us at work, fear has the potential to be prevalent. And I think whenever fear has the potential to be prevalent, our history will come in. It has to, right? I think business is always personal. Like, I think it takes a profound amount of energy to try to compartmentalize things, and I think eventually the dam will break. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't think it's possible for a sustained period of time. And I think, like, I mean, my personal experience is that I've had to do the work to have the right to lead. Like, yeah, like, you know what I mean? Like, I've had, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I've had to do the personal work. I think a lot of people get into leadership roles, but they haven't necessarily done the work. And I think, to your point, I think it ultimately catches up. That's been my experience.
I absolutely agree. And I like how you say eventually the dam will burst, because it will. It will. And it may burst in all sorts of different ways. And I 100% agree that to be an effective leader, and this is the work that I do with the company that I have here in Australia, it's part of a global company, Potential Project. The work that we do with Potential Project is very much about assisting people to gain that self-awareness first of all, and that helps them to also see that there are things going on inside of them that they actually need to work on. Because if they don't, then it will become apparent down the track in one form or another. So it's that self-awareness, it's the awareness of what's going on with others as well. With that is then the next important quality of wisdom. Like, what do we do with this? And that wisdom might be knowing that we have work that we need to do on ourselves in order to be effective as a leader. It's also the wisdom of how we can best relate with people within our teams or within our organizations. And it's also the compassion, it's the care, that whatever we do, we need to do it with care, whether that's self-care or whether it's care for others as well. So I agree with you. To really be an effective leader, we do need to look at those things. We do need to look at what's going on inside of us. And then that helps us to then more effectively lead others and teams and organizations.
How do you get someone to develop self-awareness?
There probably needs to be a certain amount of willingness on their part to start with. And I think there are people who go through our programs who listen, but perhaps might not be ready to actually do the work of self-awareness. Because self-awareness, in some ways, it's a bit like going into an attic, a dark attic that we haven't looked at for a while. And we begin to, with a little bit of a light that you can just gradually turn up the light, you get to see, oh, there's maybe a bit of spaciousness here in this attic. That's lovely. Oh, actually, there's all this clutter that's built up around the walls, and there are some cobwebs, and there are some things that I hadn't looked at for quite a while. So I know that's hard work for people. But I like to think that I do this and the work that we do as well is very much done in a gentle way and in a supportive way. And it's done with research as well that's backing up what we do, and there's neuroscience as well. But it's taking people on this journey, knowing that there's a bit that they need to do with that, but also knowing that there's a degree in which they are wanting to do it and having an understanding of what that degree is. But I'll very much help people to support themselves to look at what's going on under the surface in their subconscious as well, and how we can start to shine a light on that bit by bit, and then what we can do to look at their self-care and their resilience and the so many other aspects associated with that as well. You know, what's their purpose? And that's really helping to develop their awareness as well.
How has meditation played a role in your life, as well as potentially playing a role in development of awareness?
It's played a huge part in my life. So like I say, that was back in the 1986, 1987 that I was first introduced to it. And I was dealing with a significant amount of stress at that point in time as a 15, 16, 17-year-old. Sad to think that someone of that age is dealing with a significant amount of stress. But I was dealing with all of the post-traumatic stress. I was having nightmares every single night as a result of the sexual violence that I had experienced. And then I was living on my own, and I was just so much that I was having to deal with. The meditation helped me at that point to realize that I had a form of inner support, even though I wasn't looking at that from this perspective of dealing with sexual violence. But it gave me a way of being able to get a place of calm inside of me, and knowing that I had a place of strength and the ability to deal with these challenging things. And then throughout the years, that's played a big part. But that's, for me, and I know it's not for everyone, for me, that's been a very big contributor to developing self-awareness. Because when I sit down to meditate, and I also don't believe that meditation needs to be something that's done sitting down formally with eyes closed. It can be done moving, it can be done swimming, it can be, which I do, it can be done walking, it can be done in all sorts of different ways. It can be done while we're cooking, all sorts of different ways. for me, when I sit down and do any of those, but particularly the formal meditation, I come face to face with my mind and what's going on in my mind. And for me, meditation is not about clearing my mind of thoughts, because actually that's not really possible. It's more about understanding those thoughts. And so it's also about understanding the emotions connected to those thoughts and the body sensations that are connected to the emotions and the thoughts. And it's very much a laboratory of self-awareness. I really get to see what's going on the inside. How is it causing a reactivity within inside of me? How is it causing me to be impulsive? And how can I watch all of that unfold? What can I learn from it? And then how can I see that pass, this quality of impermanence? It will move on. That's all part of the self-awareness for me. Do you have experience in this as well, Jay?
I do. So I started, well, I was sober maybe 4, 5 years. And I remember I was laying in my bed and my life was manic. I was doing like an executive MBA. I was working tons. I was like in this journey to like build a life as a rebellion against trauma. Self-imposed trauma, different to your trauma. But you know what I mean? I'm going to succeed, right? In the face of, right? In spite of. And I remember I was laying in my bed and I was exhausted and the washing machine had finished. And I just wanted to lay in my bed, but my mind wouldn't allow me to. It was like, get the laundry out, get the laundry out, get the laundry out, get the laundry out. I was like, I knew that the laundry didn't have to be taken out in that minute. And funnily enough, this was the final repetitive thought that nearly took me over the edge. And so around 5 years sober, I started meditating. And this isn't uncommon for addicts and alcoholics. Like, and there's lots of theories around meditation. I was just at a recovery talk the other day, and husband and wife been sober about 30 years. His meditation, he'll read something and contemplate it, where she formally meditates. And they meditate together. It's beautiful. As husband and wife, right? So they have their morning kind of ritual together. For me, around 5 years, I started meditating and a formal practice with some Tibetans in Sydney. And then I lost it when I had my children. I found I would try to sit and they would run in their room, and then I'd get frustrated because I wasn't able to find my own time. And then I lost it for about 5 years. So I've only recently have gone back to it. And it's generally pain that takes me back to the cushion. And because I'm a manic person, everything about me is hyper speed. And my wife sometimes says living with me is like being in a cortisol attack, which isn't great, because I'm just trying to just get so much shit done, right? Like, you don't understand. I've got to, and I know where that all comes from. So absolutely. And the question I have for you, because, people in the recovery community talk about this, and I have no doubt this, like, should we expect when we start meditating for it to be quite confrontational? Like, I think a lot of people give up before the miracle. Like, is it supposed to be challenging at the start? Like, what should newcomers to meditation expect?
Oh, that is a big question, because there are all sorts of different things that people could expect. And so much of what you've just said could be things that I could pick up on as well. But to answer that question, I think they could expect that they will experience a lot that's going on for them. We get to experience a very busy mind. We get to experience the busyness within our body as well, and within our emotions. And for some people, that can be quite challenging. That can be something that's difficult for them to actually be seeing, because we are so used to trying to just get on with the next thing. And I really relate to what you're saying about, and plus, you're running a business and you've got so much going on. It's understandable that you would have this feeling of being quite manic going on. And so I understand. I truly get that as well. And I feel that with my life, because I'm running a business and I'm a parent and there's just a gazillion things going on. For me, that's where meditation actually helps me to just hit the pause button for a little bit as well. So I think when people are first beginning to do so, I think they think that, oh, this is going to be wonderful. I'm just going to be able to clear my mind of thoughts and I'm going to experience some sort of a state of bliss for a period of time. And then they actually commence doing it and see that, well, actually, that's not my experience. And they give up. But the point about it, for some people, it might be going down the path of a type of serenity or calm. But the point about it, I believe anyway, is more about insight. It's more about self-awareness. It's more about developing that wisdom inside of us. So it's worth pushing through those difficult times, I think anyway, from my experience. I can't speak on behalf of others.
I've had to go back to formal practice, so to speak. There's a Buddhist monastery up where I live here. So I live in the Dandenong Ranges in Melbourne. I moved from Sydney some time ago, and there is a great monastery here where they have Westerners. The monks are Westerners. I typically find that works better for me because the context, they have the context, and I have to go somewhere. And for me, that's the type of person I am. Like when I do things, I tend to like to put a framework around it because it drives accountability as well. But it then involves learning, and I feel like I'm back into a forum. So I've recently started to do that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I agree with you completely because I think having the framework around it is really, really important. If someone had said to me, you just sit down for 10 minutes or however long that it might be, close your eyes and meditate, I wouldn't get that real understanding of what it's about. So that's why I've done so much study within this area. And I think that framework is so important. And I do the same thing as you. Like since we last saw each other, I've been on a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and very much like I've taken a whole booklet full of notes because the teacher is so experienced and had lived as a monk as well. But this is something he's been doing for decades. And having that intellectual framework around it, I think helps me to also get the experiential benefits from the practice as well.
Shifting the conversation back around survivors of sexual violence, if you were to meet someone that suffered from sexual violence and, they were wondering how they could reclaim or start to reclaim their sense of self and create some purpose. And I know this is a big question, Jenny, but how would you commence that conversation? Like, what would your wisdom be for them as to how they could do that?
Well, I allow this to be quite as self-guided, like a coaching where we don't give answers when we're a coach. We're really supporting the person to discover for themselves actually what they need to do and what's important. So I would never come along with like a blueprint of this is what you must do. Yes, I could offer a whole range of different options, but the first thing that I do is to listen, and just to listen and to ask questions if that's appropriate for me to do so, like to ask that gentle little question for them to get that insight themselves about what is the next thing that's important for them. Because for each person, it's different. And so for me, I want to listen. I want to listen deeply. I want to be completely present for that person and see them for who they are and really listening to what they're saying in this moment right now. What are they saying right now? And from there, and only from that point, will that guide me to then be open to the insight inside of me as to what might be the appropriate thing to say next. And that could be a whole vast range of different avenues that we could go down at that point in time.
Just a question with that. maybe it's a comment. It feels like around a topic like sexual violence, people don't know how to deal with it. So we either want to fix it. I suppose it's like when anyone brings something huge to you, like it can be quite jarring, right? Because you're like, you don't really know how to be there. So what I'm hearing from you is like creating space.
Yeah, that's right. And because we actually, and I understand that very natural feeling inside of us that this is something that's really painful for this person. Can I fix it for them? Or it's also sometimes I think we do that as a way of alleviating our own discomfort inside. But the words that you've used then, creating space, I think is really, really important. After that TEDx talk, I was surprised, as I guess I'm always surprised. But on that time, I was actually really surprised about the number of people who came up to me afterwards and said, that's been my experience too. And it almost brings me to tears just thinking about it right now. There was one moment where I was just walking up the stairs to get to the area right at the back, the accessible area for people in wheelchairs, to go see a friend of mine who needed to sit up there. And a woman sort of grabbed my hand as I walked past and she said, I'm 80 years old and I'll never forget what happened to me. And she wasn't the only one. There were so many people. You might remember in my talk, I said that in Australia, on average, it takes 24 years for people to disclose the abuse that they experienced. And someone came up to me in the break and said, I don't know what her exact words were, but I remember what her saying was sort of like it hit her so hard inside, but not as a difficult thing, but just like as almost an eye-opening. She said, 24 years, that was exactly the number of years it took for me to be able to tell someone what had happened. And then there were others. Like, I was actually surprised the number of people. And I can't have a blanket way of speaking to all of, I can't have a blueprint way, because for the woman who's 80 and for the other person who had only just recently told her family, and for someone else who has never told anybody at all, ever, other than coming up to me and saying that, each one requires that space. It just requires that ability for me to stop everything that I'm doing in that moment. And I'm here, I hear you, I'm listening.
Yeah, like I think the numbers would be staggering if we really dove deep, it particularly prior to, 30, 40, 50 years ago. You've got regional Australia, like there was nothing, right? I think like if you really went deep in from a societal perspective, we tried to understand the impact. I know in 2000 and not 2019, wrote I ran 7 consecutive marathons for Bravehearts, a wonderful organization based out of Brisbane, and and they do a lot of work in advocacy. And I was talking to Ian Johnson. His daughter Kayleen was the one that was sexually abused by his own father, and when in and he told me the story of when he confronted his own father. His father's response was just wild. Like I only gave her a little touch or something, and Ian didn't know what to do. Right, like Ian wanted to kill him. It was his dad, and then when they went and told the family and went to the cops, like half the family didn't believe it or didn't want to believe it. I think they thought it should be swept under the rug, and so effectively it tore the family in half. And then Hetty, Kayleen's mom, being the type of woman she was, she just went on a rampage. She was, this happened. We're going to start our own advocacy group. And it was remarkable what she did and what they did as a family. But that's when I really learned about like how much this stuff is swept under the rug, not only from the police, but from the families because of reputation or I don't know, right?
There is so much of that happens, the sweeping under the rug and the not being willing to talk about it. That's part of what I was saying in my talk as well, in that TEDx talk about, believing and listening and helping that person to not feel alone, because quite often we do feel alone, so alone.
What is the most important message you would hope to convey through this advocacy work?
If I was to bring it down to one word, it would be kindness. So that could be self-kindness. And I know that can be hard for people, so I like to think of it as just turning up the dial. If we are, our ability to show kindness to ourselves is currently a 3 out of 100, what can we do to turn the dial +1 to make it a 4 out of 100? So there's self-kindness, there's kindness to others. If I was to bring it down to that one thing, it's kindness. I think that's the work of Bravehearts as well. That's the work of the Daniel Morcombe Foundation. I was the guest impact speaker at their gala ball this year, and what they do is it's about kindness. And yes, it's about strength and change and advocacy. And that's exactly what I wish to offer as well. And like, I went to the police and it went through the whole investigation, went through a trial, person was found guilty. That was actually a form of kindness as well, even though it was a show of strength and it was a show of courage. But for me, that was a form of kindness towards others who have experienced this. And it was an act of kindness towards that very younger version or versions of myself, like the younger me who'd experienced sexual violence. It's a form of kindness.
Absolutely. Like the moment that someone like yourself can speak up, it gives others the right and opportunity to as well, right?
I'd like to hope that that's the case. Yeah,
I
I would
think
really.
so.
And it was the courage of others that inspired me to do that. Like in my doing this Wisdom of Survivors project, where I was speaking to other people who'd gone through this, I saw that they had faced these moments of such hard times and were so courageous. That inspired me to like, actually, I can do this as well. Now, I know that that's not for everyone, but I want to say that anything that I have shown has come off the back of really seeing that in other people as well.
That's remarkable. Well, Jenny, I think we'll land the plane there. Really, really want to thank you for your time and sharing your strength and hope and wisdom here on what is not always an easy topic to broach. I do want to ask you, if people want to learn more about you and your work in leadership and advocacy for victims of sexual violence, where can they find you?
There are so many different places, but on this particular topic, maybe the best place is my website, which is wisdomofsurvivors.com. Wisdomofsurvivors.com. I'm on LinkedIn, so that's a place where I put a lot of things that's more related to the business work and the corporate work that I do. And I have my Jenny Steadman website that is quite good for being able to see the entirety of what it is that I do. So that's jennysteadman.com.au. And before we move on, RJ, I want to say a big thank you to you for being willing to have this type of topic on your podcast as well. I really appreciate this because it is these conversations and it's the strength and the courage and the willingness of people like you to talk about this, to not be someone who keeps it hidden in the shadows or swept under the rug, but being willing to be that person who's prepared to talk about it. So I'm deeply grateful to you for asking me to be on your podcast and to have this conversation. And you've handled it with such care and grace. And I'm deeply grateful. Thank you, RJ.
Thank you, Jenny. I really appreciate that.